Okay, we've covered John Lennon's solo albums post the Beatles. We've covered Paul McCartney's #1 albums post the Beatles. So now we turn our attention to the quiet Beatle, to George Harrison. After the breakup of the Beatles, George recorded 12 studio albums, 2 live albums, 4 compilation albums, and 35 singles. Not so quiet after all. Let's take a look at the 12 studio albums and 1 of the live albums, and then we'll rank them. You ready? Let's drop the needle. Even before John Lennon thought of recording without the Beatles, George Harrison had already beaten him to it. His first solo album was a soundtrack to an obscure film called Wonderwall. The album was Wonderwall Music and was released in late 1968. It's also the first album to be released on the Beatles' new label, Apple. The songs are all instrumental. George plays keyboard and guitar, and the album fuses Eastern and Western musical styles. It charted in the US at number 49. Interestingly enough, the title of the album is what inspired Oasis to have a hit song in 1995 called Wonderwall. George's second solo album also came out when he was still part of the Beatles. Electronic Sound was released in 1969. This is one of the first electronic music albums released by a rock musician using a Moog synthesizer. The Beatles went on to use the Moog much later on Abbey Road. Anyway, the album is really just George playing around and trying to learn the synthesizer and making some pretty weird sounds. Like Lennon's unfinished music, the cover is more interesting than the album. Both the front and back covers are original paintings by George. There's even more controversy on the front cover. George was introduced to the Moog synthesizer by Bernie Krause and his partner Paul Beaver, who had recorded a number of electronic albums. George apparently recorded Bernie's demo of the Moog to George and included it without Bernie's permission on the album. Bernie was furious. So if you look closely on the front cover, you can see Bernie Krause's name under this silver paint. His name was painted over at his insistence. This is the second and the last album to be released on Zapple, the Beatles' avant-garde label, the first one being Lennon's Life with the Lions. With the release and failure of Electronic Sounds, it didn't chart in the UK and it only hit 191 in the States. Zapple closed. Then the Beatles break up, and after years of frustration by not being respected by Lennon and McCartney as a songwriter and not getting very many of his songs on Beatle albums, George unleashes a ton of new music and his masterpiece. It comes seemingly out of nowhere. Who knew such a quiet person could roar with a 3-disc album? Such great songs. The title, All Things Must Pass, which the Beatles passed up on putting on an album. Isn't It a Pity? I'd Have You Any Time, co-written with Bob Dylan. Wah Wah, written immediately after George had decided to leave the Beatles, but he came back. What Is Life? Behind That Locked Door. The monster hit, My Sweet Lord. Beware of Darkness. And my 2 favorites, The Ballad of Sir Frankie Crisp and Apple Scruffs, written for the young ladies who stood outside the studio and Apple's offices waiting to see the Beatles. Many classic songs, produced by Phil Spector and George, utilizing Spector's wall of sound approach. Just a year later, George releases another triple album, this time the live recording of the Concert for Bangladesh, his groundbreaking charity shows at Madison Square Garden. The album includes Ravi Shankar, Bob Dylan, Leon Russell, Eric Clapton, Ringo Starr, the first time he and George appears on a stage together post-Beatles, Billy Preston, Klaus Voormann, and many more. George, ever the gracious host, lets Leon, Ringo, Billy Preston, and Bob Dylan all sing their own songs. George plays his own hits and 3 Beatles songs. While My Guitar Gently Weeps, Here Comes the Sun, and Something. In 1973, George returns with another #1 album, Living in the Material World. This album contains the hit Give Me Love, Give Me Peace on Earth, Sue Me, Sue You Blues, about his legal hassles about copyright infringement over the song of My Sweet Lord. In the following year, 1974, George releases Dark Horse. This album is connected to George's controversial North American tour. It was the first tour by an ex-Beatle, and expectations were very high. It didn't help that George started the concert with Ravi Shankar and his Indian musicians doing a long, extended set. Now, the concert that I was at, and it happened on many concerts across the country, the audience got really bored and restless during this Indian music set. So when George finally came out on stage, what he would do is lecture the audience on why they should be appreciative of Indian music. That didn't go down so well. And in addition, George had rehearsed so hard that when the tour started, he had laryngitis, and the best he could do is croak out the songs that people wanted to hear. And then the third insult was the fact that he changed the lyrics to some classic songs to make them much more spiritual, to be singing about the Lord. The tour was pretty much a disaster. The album itself contains 2 hits, Dark Horse and Ding Dong Ding Dong. Other standout tracks are Far East Man and Simply Shady. The album hit number 4 on the charts. George's next album is called Extra Texture, and it is the last studio album to be released on the Beatles' Apple label. Standout songs are You, This Guitar Can't Keep From Crying, a sequel of sorts to the Beatles' hit While My Guitar Gently Weeps. The album hits number 9 in the charts. For his 7th album, George releases 33 1/3. This title is a double pun. It was George's age at the time of recording, and of course 33 1/3 is the RPMs that a vinyl record spins at when it's playing. Great songs are the hits, this song and Cracker Box Palace. It charted at number 11. In 1979, George releases an album that he calls George Harrison. It contains 2 hits, Blow Away and Not Guilty, a song that George had recorded for the Beatles' White Album, but it was never released. This album charts at number 14. 2 years later, in 1981, George releases Somewhere in England. This is George's first album after John Lennon's murder, and the song All Those Years Ago plays tribute to John. This album charts at number 11. George's 10th album is titled Gone Tropo. He did nothing to promote it, so of course it did not sell well. There are 2 great songs on the record. Gone Tropo, which sums up George's attitude at the time while he was living in Hawaii. Here's some of the lyrics. There he, sitting in the moonlight, not found, living no city. His smile, mucho in the sunshine. High life, counting de fruit bat. Tropo, gone tropo. Tropo, it's time you know, I've gone tropo. The second great song is Dream Away, which was actually written for Terry Gilliam's film Time Bandits. George dropped out of the music business for 5 years, and in 1987 came roaring back with a hit album called Cloud 9. The album included a number 1 hit single, I've Got My Mind on You, and other standout cuts are Fish in the Sand, When We Were Fab, and Devil's Radio. This album charted at number 4. Cloud 9 was produced by George and Jeff Lynne of ELO fame. It started a great friendship, which developed into the Traveling Wilburys, and actually included Lynne producing the Beatles' anthology project and producing the new singles Real Love and Free as a Bird. George's last studio album is Brainwashed. It was released after his death and 15 years after Cloud 9. It charted at number 18. Like Double Fantasy, the album that came out when John Lennon died, this is a bittersweet record, but I like it a lot. Great tracks are Any Road, Pisces Fish, Marwa Blues, Stuck Inside a Cloud, and the title track, Brainwashed. Okay, so we've talked about 12 George Harrison studio albums and 1 live album. So how do they rank? Here we go. At the bottom of the pile, number 13, Electronic Sounds. It's just gibberish. Number 12, Wonderwall. Very, very uneven. Number 11, Extra Texture. Not much here, except My Guitar Can't Keep From Crying. Number 10, 33 1/3. Number 9, George Harrison, which contains Not Guilty, which should have been on a Beatle album. Number 8, Somewhere in England, with the great song All Those Years Ago. Number 7, Dark Horse. Number 6, Gone Tropo. I know, but I like it. Number 5, Living in the Material World. Number 4, Cloud 9. Number 3, The Amazing Concert for Bangladesh. Number 2, Brainwashed. And in the number 1 spot, George Harrison's masterpiece, All Things Must Pass. Now, I'm sure you've got different opinions, and I'd love to hear them in the comments below. Let me know what your favorite George Harrison post-Beatle album is. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and keep it rockin'. If you liked this episode, hit the like button, and you can also leave me a comment down below, and I'll respond to you. If you subscribe, we'll let you know when future episodes come out. Most of the albums that I talk about can be found at your local vinyl store or on eBay. Individual songs most likely are on Spotify, Apple Music, or Amazon Music, or even some on YouTube.